Well, welcome. Tonight we're going to take a look at the world from a liberal view. Why don't we start with some introductions?
Okay, my name is Rand Barthel. I live in Mendon. I am a member of the Mendon Democratic Town Committee, and I'm also an active member of 350 Massachusetts, which is a statewide climate advocacy organization.
My name is Glenn Wyke. I am a Milford resident. I'm currently part of the Milford Democratic Town Committee, and I act as the treasurer.
Christine Crane, Milford Town resident, Democratic Town Committee member, State Committee member, and part of SEIU Local 509, which is social workers in Massachusetts, and drinking liberally.
Now, state member,
Uh-huh.
what does that mean?
That means I'm a member of the state.
No, it's the
Democratic
governing body.
State Committee. So you have your town committees, the Democratic town committees, and you have your state committee that oversees the policies and the ideology of the Democratic State Committee, and then they have the National Committee. So it's that hierarchy.
But the state committee, does it have a lot of influence over the locals?
Not really.
I
mean,
can't
there's
see
an
Milford.
ideology that you kind of need to follow, kind of like the state law and town laws. Town laws can't supersede a
Right.
state law, similar to that hierarchy.
Because I was going to say, knowing the people on the Milford Democratic Committee, I can't see them being dramatically influenced. They pretty much know their mind and aren't scared to
Push back.
push back.
No, I've never experienced any attempt to influence what our town committee does
Right.
coming from the state committee. It's been more the state committee wanting us to be involved in,
Exactly.
democratic goings-on.
Well, it's got to be easier in Massachusetts where you have 12 Republicans in the state. I mean, everything else is true blue.
There's shades of true blue. It's
Yeah,
not
there
black.
is.
It's not blue and not blue. It's
Yeah, but there's a problem, Al, when you have one party that kind of dominates a state, that the lines blur between the parties, and even within a party, because they're the governing party and they're going to be the governing party, they're subject to a lot of influence from corporations and other things too. So it's not, I wish we could say they were, fully democratic, but I think there's a lot of shenanigans that happens
But
behind
you know something?
the
I've
scenes.
always been proud that I have a hard time telling the difference between a liberal Massachusetts Republican and a conservative Massachusetts Democrat. They seem to be a big middle ground.
When was the last time you found a liberal Massachusetts Republican, and where did this sighting take place, and was it verified?
But it's not like you get
I
out
heard
into
they were extinct.
you get out into the square states.
Yes.
And
Out
they're
there.
deep red.
Yes.
You get out to the West Coast, deep blue.
Yes.
I mean,
Maybe it's the ocean water. that
Could be the
helps.
ocean water, but what does happen is that people who are of a more pragmatic frame of mind, who want to exert or find their way into power and influence in state government, in a one-party state, they are going to join the ruling party. So some people who would be Republicans, if there were a Republican Party in the state, will join the Democratic Party and then kind of operate as a more conservative part of that party.
well, you really don't have much of a choice because,
Right.
I mean, I don't like being called unenrolled. It feels like I'm not participating.
Yeah.
And in Milford, where we had 9% of the population that could vote turn
Oh,
out,
Jesus, yeah.
I don't want to be
man.
associated with the 91% that didn't. But if I wanted to register as a Republican, I'm locked out of the primary vote
Mm-hmm.
because most of it's going to be for the Democratic race.
Often.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think you're right that a lot of people who might shift over to being called Republican are unenrolled.
Mm-hmm.
Not non-participating,
Right.
but what we used to call independent until the Independent Party said, hey, you can't use my name.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the, what you call a moderate Democrat, I mean, a lot of them really are non-ideological. They just want to be part of the ruling party so they can influence policy.
Yeah. The only thing that really got me confused is I remember when I went to vote for the primary, and I said, I want to vote for John Fernandez. Let me have a blue ballot. And the person at the Portuguese Club looked at me and says, John's a Democrat. I said, yeah, that's why I want the blue ballot. She goes, no, in Massachusetts, the blue ballot's Republican,
Oh,
and the red ballot's Democrat.
because we're
I
mixing
couldn't
it up.
understand. It's like, okay, they're just trying to confuse people?
Yeah.
But let's start. Painful topic, Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
And in light of true transparency, the lightning rod is from my alma mater, Holy Cross. Glenn, you probably have an opinion about this.
Sure. So there was a report out from ProPublica, I believe, that investigated a lot of the finances of Clarence Thomas, and trying to match up the reports that he'd been submitting, the financial reports, to disclose how he's earning his money and what his real finances look like. And they discovered a whole bunch of really outrageous things, like trips that he had been receiving from a billionaire, Harlan Crow, that Harlan Crow purchased his mother's house and lets her live there rent-free, that I believe it's a relative or someone that was adopted. Harlan Crow paid their full freight through college. And so this has caused quite a stir, because it really puts into question what the hell is going on at the Supreme Court, where we have billionaires who are playing favorites with these guys and giving them a whole bunch of funding. And that's not it. There's
But they
also,
wouldn't expect any influence for that, would they?
of course, and you know, Justice Thomas, when this billionaire has had cases come to the Supreme Court, he has not recused himself, which is bad. It looks bad.
So, I mean, the point being that they're supposed to avoid not just the actuality of conflict of interest, but even the appearance of it.
Right.
And they're not bothering to do that. And this now applies to Justice Alito also, who went on one heck of a fishing trip up in Alaska with another billionaire and this Leonard.
$100,000?
You know, it's
Must have been some kind of fish.
yeah, I'll
yeah.
say.
Full plated,
And-
I guess.
Yeah, and you know, and accompanied by Leonard Leo, who is the head of the
Federalist
the
Society.
Federalist Society, and has, you know, been documented by Sheldon Whitehouse as basically kind of masterminding a whole pipeline of conservative jurists through and onto the courts as part of a.
My fundamental problem is that it feels like they're above the law.
Exactly. Well, they are behaving like they're above the law.
But I understand there's no
It's
real
a reason
law.
why it feels that way.
Thomas has not done anything illegal.
Well, actually, he
Wait a
did,
minute.
because he didn't disclose those things on the
Right.
financial
Oh,
disclosure
okay.
Yeah,
forms,
that
which
was
is
actually
required to
illegal.
do.
Yeah.
Because it bothers me that I can't do overtly stupid things in public without my company suffering. And
Yes.
therefore, they can terminate me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a responsibility, you know, I'm just the vice president, but the image,
Yeah.
if I go to a trade show and run around and streak,
Mhm.
well, that would show negative, especially with my body. That would really not look good for the
Right.
company that they are keeping me.
Right.
When I see Alito and Thomas, and I sit there and say, wait a minute, whether or not technically you can take these trips, whether you
Right.
disclose them or not is a different issue, but just fundamentally taking these gifts. I mean, as a town official, you're allowed to take up to $50,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to disclose it.
State official, too.
Yeah.
Same thing.
But
Right.
the idea is
can't-
there's a
yeah.
limit.
Yeah.
Right. And federal judges in the lower courts, the appellate courts and the district courts, also have to follow those rules and actually do follow them.
Yeah.
But there
And-
is a judicial code of conduct that
Right.
they also have to follow, and the Supreme Court does not have a code of conduct that they're supposed to follow. There
So
are
wh-
rules.
why?
There are disclosure rules, the financial disclosure rules, but beyond that, they don't.
But now the idea of the Supreme Court being totally independent
Mhm.
is supposed to guarantee that nobody can influence them. But can Congress make laws that now limit what the Supreme Court can take?
been
Congress
talking
can
about
make
that.
laws. Congress does have authority it is, the court system itself is established by laws that Congress passed in exercising authority that the Constitution gives it to set up courts. And so Congress does have authority and we don't know exactly how far this authority goes, but and anything they pass would have to be reviewed by guess what? These same Supreme
I was
Court
going to say,
justices.
isn't it the
How-
justices that would say whether it's constitutional or not?
But
Yeah.
what's also killer about this is that all of this is happening at a time when this court has issued a series of rulings, the most egregious of which is the Dobbs
Yeah.
decision on abortion, that have seriously angered vast numbers of Americans. And in the middle of all that, they are acting as though they don't have to follow any rules at all. And so they are themselves hurting their own credibility and legitimacy in the eyes of the people they don't have an army of police to enforce their rulings. Their rulings depend upon people complying with them because people understand that they're supposed to.
Yeah, but yes, they do. I disagree because FBI, police, if they rule something unconstitutional,
Though the FBI and the federal law enforcement agencies, will
adjust.
will adjust generally, but the Supreme Court doesn't have an ability to force the executive
They don't
branch
police
Right.
their own
and there have been
rulings.
cases where the executive branch refused to obey Supreme Court rulings. There was the case where Andrew Jackson refused to respect a Supreme Court ruling that was in favor of the Cherokee Indian tribe back in the 1830s, ruling that the Cherokee Indian tribe had a valid treaty and that they could stay where they were, and instead, Jackson wanted to do the Trail of Tears. And so he said, if the court has made this ruling, let the court enforce it. And he went ahead and did what he wanted to do anyway.
Is he
So there've
related to
been-
Trump?
Actually, spiritually, maybe.
Yes.
I mean, he was a piece of work,
Ah.
Andrew Jackson.
You got to let that guy die.
Which one?
Trump. I mean, everything. We'll talk about
But
it later.
the
but
outrageous behaviors we were talking about, thumbing
Yeah.
your nose up to the, a court of law or any kind of, what's the point of having a law if nobody's going to follow it and enforce it and hold people accountable? And the Supreme Court's a case in point, too. Weren't they supposed to push back on Congress? They wanted them to have a meeting and some kind of
well,
hearing
let's hold
about their
that for when
ethics?
we talk about him.
Yeah.
But right
Well, I'm
now,
talking about the Supreme
if you
Court,
look
though.
at the Supreme Court, they're more activist than I ever thought they would be.
Well, Justice Roberts also, when this whole thing started blowing up, they started pressing him on, what are you going to do about this?
Right.
You guys have obvious issues here, and he just kind of shrugs. I mean, it's completely out of control. Even the spouses of the Supreme Court justices have conflicts of interest. Justice Thomas wasn't putting Ginny Thomas's salaries on his financial disclosure forms, and she was working for the Heritage Foundation and some other right-wing organizations, getting $500,000 a year. I mean, that obviously should be on there. Justice Roberts' wife works for a firm that places lawyers on firms that do business with the court. So she made something like $10 million over the last several years, placing lawyers in firms that are going to then present business in front of the court.
No conflict of interest there.
Yeah, so it's ripe with all kinds of
Unethical
conflicts of
behavior.
interest and unethical behavior,
Yep.
and people are paying attention now. What's going to happen? I don't think much, honestly, because this is the court that conservatives want. It's extremely ideological. You know, it used to be when jurists would get on the court, they would follow the Constitution, and they would take seriously the law. You know, I watched a little of the conservative view, and there was a comment by Ed, I believe, where he said that jurists would move left when they would get on the court. But really, all they were doing was following the law and following the established law and following the Constitution. And that's not happening now because we have ideologues on the court who are paid by billionaires to come up with the rulings that they want.
But now when you think about, like, to me, Kennedy was a good example.
Which one?
Anthony Kennedy.
Yes.
Anthony Kennedy, yeah.
Right.
When you think about, everybody had him pegged. He was going to be set. And when he got on the bench, he went more to the middle.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, makes me feel better. You know, because nothing scares me more than a far left person than a far right person.
Mhm.
If you're voting dogma, you scare me. You know, I want somebody who'll look at an issue and take it on for its merits. And now it seems like, you know, Clarence Thomas, again, it kills me, the good Jesuit educated boy, is now taking shots at contraception.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's really, though, just upholding the precedent that had been established for hundreds of years. I mean, this Supreme Court has been blowing up precedents all over the place. They've blown up just about every campaign finance rule you can find, you know, over the last decade or so.
Well, and the Dobbs decision was a prime example
Yeah, that too.
of a precedent that they decided to throw out the window, not because anything had changed about the law, but because they had the votes to do it.
Yeah.
But now they got to take that on state by state.
Right. And
That still, you look and it has some bothersome issues like, what right do I have to talk about your body?
None.
Oh.
Absolutely
Okay.
none.
none.
You know what I mean?
The whole idea is absurd.
But it's okay. Now, if you want to get a vasectomy, you don't have any bars, you don't have any barriers to getting that, right?
I'm old. I don't.
But the fact that, I mean,
Yeah.
it's so unbalanced about these decisions. That's
Yeah.
the thing that's so outrageous.
Okay.
Well, and you have now red states that are trying to pass laws that are designed to reach into blue states to prevent, like Texas or Oklahoma
to
would like
sue.
to be able to prosecute people from their state who come to, say, Massachusetts
But they want their
to
own
get an
state
abortion.
rights.
But wait a
They
minute,
don't-
I have a fundamental problem with somebody, and I know it's a character flaw, but I live in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I do too.
I elected people to represent my view in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
I don't think I have the right to expect them to influence Rhode Island.
Certainly not.
But the same way, I don't care if it's Texas, California, wherever it is.
Mhm.
Stay out of my state.
Right, but now Massachusetts is having to go to the trouble of passing laws to
protect-
defend its own citizens
That's
from harassment coming from out of state if they, for example, assist people coming from those states to get abortions.
Yeah, part of the way the laws are being written in places like Texas is, aside from the ban itself, they're also making it so that if you find out that somebody has assisted in someone getting an abortion, you can rat on that person, and then they would be charged with a felony. So it's a really ugly way to try to enforce this kind of law.
Has that been played out at all? They had one case, I thought,
Yeah,
about someone
I've only
trying
heard
to-
of one.
I don't think it's made all the way through the courts.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this is you know, I hate to even bring this up, but it harkens back to when, in the early parts of the the changeover from the Weimar Republic to when the Nazis took over in Germany, they would have radio shows where people could call in and turn people in for being Jews or gay or whatever,
Communists or whatever.
and then people would get harassed, they'd get beaten up, or they would be jailed. Unfortunately, I think this is kind of the direction we're headed with these kinds of laws.
Do you think it'll get that far?
Why, did we think we would be at this point already years ago? I think it could get that far.
I don't see why
I have more
not.
faith in the American public.
I think in our state, definitely not. But I think in places like Florida, where you have Nazis hanging around Disney, waving DeSantis banners and not seeing any pushback, that is kind of scary.
But we've had Nazis in Milford.
We've-
Every 8 years,
Right.
the
But-
herd comes through, and you sit there and pray and say, nobody pay attention. Just let them move on. Because I found fecal matter. I think it's called the Crusader.
Oh, that stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
And they put it in my mailbox. And it's like my mother always said, don't feed a stray cat. Because if you feed them, they'll come back. And you just ignore them, and they go away.
Well, that works here.
Right.
It doesn't work when ideas that they are espousing start to gain
Momentum.
too much acceptance in the general public, because it starts with their playing on grievances that people have about immigration, about whatever the other matters are that sort of activate whatever latent prejudice and fear is present in the population, and they can gradually gain credibility by doing that. And so you have people like David Duke running as Republicans and saying it's all, and they don't talk about, white supremacist homelands right off the bat. They'll talk about cracking down on welfare, which is understood to be a racist dog whistle.
But unless you
And-
live in a cave, you look at David Duke, and what do you think about?
Right.
Up
Well-
here, obviously that's not going to fly. But unfortunately, that does fly in a lot of the Deep South.
They've worked hard at re-imaging themselves. They've worked hard over the years at trying to be more mainstream and not so extreme. And we now have, because of the 2016 election, a lot more permission for people to express this, and it's just escalated things. It was always there, but they have a forum now, and they have support.
Well, the sad part is that pesky First Amendment
Freedom of speech.
guarantees that they have the right to say stupid things, in my opinion.
And repression doesn't work because they'll just play poor me, they're repressing me, and get attention that way. So, it doesn't, just like it doesn't work really to go banning books, because that ends up causing far more interest in the books being
I was
banned.
going to say,
than
I don't
Right.
get this whole movement. You bring back the change of the regime in Nazi Germany. It started with books.
Yep.
And you
And
sit there and
media.
say, okay, I have a problem if you try and force me to read certain books that I don't like, I don't believe in, whatever. But I have the same problem if you tell me I can't read them. Because I'm seeing this banning of books, this drag queen thing.
Yeah. It's
I
all
mean,
demagoguery.
To me, it's simple. If I'm not interested in looking at drag queens, I won't go.
Yeah. And also trans people. I mean, they make up, less than 1% of our population, but suddenly they're the biggest crisis
The
ever.
boogeyman. It's a distraction from other things.
Yeah, and they're just looking for a victim. When you're a bully, you have to find a victim to beat up, and that's what they're doing. Trans people have been around forever.
But haven't we gone through this?
Bugs Bunny was a
We
cross-dresser.
Bugs Bunny.
He
Yeah.
dressed, when you think about all the different shows
Yeah.
over the years where they've portrayed Some Like It Hot, that great movie,
Yeah.
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Mrs.
Yeah.
Doubtfire.
Well,
But realistically, haven't we gone through this whole thing of the gay marriage and all that, it's going to bring down the institution and
Every
all of a
time we
sudden-
make progress, Al, there's
There's backlash.
there's a reactionary backlash,
Yeah.
and that's what this is. It's not going to be settled until it's settled. You know,
And it's heightened by the fact that the population is getting browner, and that makes people who have racist attitudes frightened and uncomfortable.
Talk to me about the borders when you bring out.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
We've
because,
added a
because
percent-
xenophobia is racism's first cousin, and we have a lot of refugees coming to our border because there are a lot of really seriously unlivable conditions in a bunch of Latin American countries, and those people are going to keep coming, really regardless of what rules we adopt. Now, we have laws on the books which talk about setting up categories of people and figuring out who qualifies to immigrate into the United States and so forth. And we have a wildly inadequate set of courts and systems in place to actually deal with the number of people who come and actually give them due process and figure out which ones we're going to send back and which ones we're going to keep. And we have a Congress that is completely deadlocked, so it will not do anything to make adequate resources available to implement existing law, nor will it even begin to think about what a different system might look like and that might be better. And since one of the parties is now really driven by great replacement theory and other, ideas that you used to have to go on Nazi websites to read about.
it was popularized by
we aren't
Tucker Carlson.
we're kind of stuck. Yeah, it was popularized by Tucker Carlson. We're kind of stuck right now. The issue is stuck, and whatever administration is in power has to try to do the best it can if it's operating in good faith
But how do you
with inadequate resources.
How do you answer the fact that we're not taking care of our own?
Well, we should take care of our own also. That's on us. That's a serious moral failure on our part. And if we're going to be, if we aspire to be a people of moral discernment, we should try to deal humanely with people who come to our borders. And we have an obligation under international human rights conventions that we are signatories to give people who wish to immigrate into the United States from other countries a fair hearing.
Well, wait a minute. You were talking about we take care of our own. We are the first ones to give the tax breaks to a lot of corporations and
Right.
that cry poverty when it comes to our social issues. So
Right.
we have the control and the power in our own hands.
Right.
We choose not to.
Yeah, the
collectively.
people who complain that we aren't taking care of our own are the people who are voting against doing anything
That's
to
right.
actually implement that.
But now, when you talk about controlling spending and taxes, 80% of the tax money comes from 20% of the people.
That's because we have we have the distribution of income that we have, and so naturally, people who have higher incomes, if you have a tax system that's at all approximating any sort of notion of fairness, they're going to be paying more.
But I have a hard time when they say, well, this woman or this man didn't pay their fair share. They only paid $10 million.
Well, if their income was $800 million or
But-
something, then
I don't know of many people, none of my friends are paying $10 million in taxes.
yeah.
So how is it that they're not paying their fair share?
Well,
You tell me.
who's not paying? Well,
Right.
who's not paying their? Who are you currently thinking of as not paying their fair share?
Well, I keep hearing the mantra, the rich never pay enough.
I'll tell you a couple of things that would be very obvious that we should be changing in our tax system. Aside from the fact that the top income bracket should be somewhere over 50%. We also have this carve out for very rich people, especially hedge fund owners. It's called the carried interest loophole. And their income is considered long-term capital gains rather than income. And they pay the long-term capital gains rate, which I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it's much less than the top income tax bracket. And there's a lot of billionaires on Wall Street who are paying that. And the Democrats were going to get rid of that loophole. And unfortunately, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema stepped in the way. But they were going to pass that as part of, I forget whether it was the Inflation Reduction Act or something else, but it was going to be a key part of one of the big packages that they were going to roll out. And the reason why they stepped in to do that, at least for Kirsten Sinema, is that a lot of big Republican billionaires gave her a big wad of money for her campaign.
No conflict of interest there.
Right.
No.
And and it's perfectly legal because the Supreme Court, with Citizens United and subsequent rulings, basically opened the floodgates. So anything goes. Billionaires can spend as much money on elections as they want, as long as it's in a super PAC or now they have leadership funds for these Congress people.
Don't we have the same thing that the unions can spend as much as
They just don't have the deep pockets, though.
Don't
And
have
it's
anything
tough
like
to
the
keep up.
resources.
We're talking about apples and oranges in terms of the wealth and, unions. Yeah, we have the ability if we had the money too, and you're talking about two different lifestyles here.
Another
Many
dimension of
years
this-
ago, Stephen Forbes proposed a flat tax. Is that an alternative?
I prefer not, because it's still a pretty big, and at least for people who are declaring their income as income, it's still a pretty big tax cut for them. I prefer we go back to the tax rates we had before Reagan, where the top tax rate
Yeah,
was
but then you're
70%.
80%, 70, 80%.
70%, yeah. You know what that would do? It would force a lot of top income people who have businesses to reinvest in their business instead of giving it to Uncle Sam.
Well, it would force them to get creative. When I was in Europe, our head of our Swedish sub came and said, "Don't give me a raise."
Yeah, it doesn't
Why?
actually help me.
No, because for me to feel $200 a month, you got to give me a $12,000 raise, because 85% is in the tax rate. So all of a sudden, the company bought vacations for their family
Right,
and had them with fancy cars.
right. Yeah. So another dimension of this, of course, is enforcement of the tax code and the fact that the IRS is deeply underfunded and has obsolete equipment to use and everything. And
That's by design, isn't it?
Which results, like, a couple of years ago, my mom and I had to call the IRS to resolve an issue. The IRS wasn't able to process her tax return because they needed to verify her identity. And in order to do that, it turned out that the automated ways of doing that, none of them worked. So we had to actually call a human being. It took weeks for us to get through because they just don't have enough people to answer the phone. Now, that's gotten better under Biden, but it's still...
But they were talking about adding 85,000
I know.
IRS.
Because they had lost a lot of people, and they never replaced them,
Right.
and they just never.
But would
And
they go
funded.
after the high-income people? There
Well,
was
that's why they didn't wanna
They said there
fund
would
it.
be 1,000 or 7,000 targets.
A lot of those people were going to be answering the phones so that you and I can get something approximating customer service when we have a
What
tax
worried
problem.
me is a lot of those people may come after you or I.
Well, so, there is such a thing as following the tax code, and,
Yeah, we pay people to make sure that we stay.
So what's the problem if you're paying your taxes and you're doing what you're supposed to?
Yeah, I think-
If someone comes after you, I've been audited.
I think the big thing is that, billionaires have been skirting tax laws for a very long time. They pay millions of dollars to accounting firms to help them hide their money, and they're very difficult to audit. And the IRS hasn't had the resources to do any of that for at least a decade. And so they've been getting away scot-free with lots of money.
What's the definition of rich?
Anybody has more money than me.
You
That's
laugh,
one
but that's
definition.
exactly what I hear. Anybody who makes $1 more than I do.
I would actually define it a little differently. I would define it as somebody who doesn't absolutely have to work for a living, is one possible definition.
Yeah,
Um,
because live off their assets and
yeah,
their
if you're
investments.
able to live off invested wealth
Mhm.
instead of earning a salary,
But is that bad?
it's not bad. We're not saying that it's bad.
okay.
We're just saying that there has to be everybody has to contribute to the society that makes wealth possible.
That's right.
And
I like that.
and we have to have a way of deciding what a fair contribution is. And the problem with a flat percentage rate is that you either end up hurting the people at the bottom too much, or you kind of it has to be graduated in order to
Make it more fair and
kind of
equitable.
reflect a notion of fairness that works in the real world. And so that's the point. And ideally, we would have a tax code that was efficiently enforced without fear or favor, and so that if you pay your taxes, nobody bothers you. And obviously there are ways in which our system departs from all of that.
So how do you fix it?
Well, legislation.
Supporting
and
the system to police it and make sure people are paying their fair share.
legislation, making the tax code simpler would help.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting rid of a lot of loopholes.
Right now, somebody like me who is not having an especially complicated tax system, nonetheless, feels the need to use TurboTax to automate the process. And so, and TurboTax, of course, is an interest group, and people like them who have an interest in keeping the tax code complicated.
So you rely on people like
Yeah.
that.
Right.
Yeah, other governments, they actually work your taxes out and send you a bill, and then you pay it.
No,
I have
that's
to pay quarterly taxes, estimated
Mm-hmm.
taxes.
one of those closet billionaires.
Yeah.
No, it's just not even much, but, you
Mm-hmm.
make sure you pay your fair share, and at the end of the year. But
Yeah.
I'm sure they'd come after me. if
Let
I
me
didn't.
throw out, this is going to get everybody wound up. Why is CNN and the left keeping Trump alive?
I don't think that's the only media outlet that's keeping Trump alive.
No, but they're contributing to it.
Ay,
I listen
Well-
to CNN in the morning after I listen to Fox, and I hear the word Trump many more times when I'm listening to CNN than I do when I'm listening to Fox.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's got to be an incentive for them because
Well,
people are watching.
Fox, of course, currently has an off again, on again relationship with Trump. They used to be his number one booster, but now they are. Well, they just had to shell out $750 million after deliberately lying to their audience over
They
his
lied?
claims of election fraud and getting called on it by the voting machine
Yeah,
company.
Dominion voting, yeah.
And so they may be feeling, I think they probably have some fairly ambivalent feelings about Fox, and they probably looking for a more preferable right-wing demagogue to
See, and
continue.
that always got me, because
with.
I
And
thought,
so I'm assuming that they're trying DeSantis on for size,
but
but
I always thought Trump guaranteed the cleanest election when he went against Biden. Because if I'm the attorney general, I'm in charge of the election, and I've got somebody like Trump saying it's going to be rigged, I'm going to go out of my way to make sure that
It
it's
isn't.
perfect. So I sat there and said, in a way, too many things that certain man would say. I didn't like what he said, but I liked his results.
well, but you won't like the other result, which is the very large percentage of the population who now will never believe that elections are free and fair in this country, no matter how much the election officials bend over backwards to make them that. And so, we can't really have democracy long term if a very sizable slice of the population
There's no
believes
faith.
that all elections are
Well,
rigged.
it's truly embarrassing that the last two elections in Milford, we had less than 9%, or less than 10%. It was 9 point something percent
Mhm.
of the eligible voters turned out. My Lord. It's kind of hard to complain about your government
Well-
if you don't participate.
True, although
Gives-
I don't think we do a very good job of advertising when
No,
the
we
elections
don't.
are.
Yeah.
That's something we could do very
I
easily. In
wonder if
fact, I
that's
think the
by
select board
design.
gets money for that,
Yeah.
but that's another story.
Gets money for,
Advertising the election?
well, you have certain things you have to do, but it's minimal.
Right, but do we do that?
No.
I don't think so.
Oh, I will find out.
I think you should.
Please do.
I will find out.
We could do
Right.
more.
But there are
Get the
things
vote
like
out.
making Election Day a national holiday and making it really easy to vote by making sure that there are enough polling stations and that they're well marked and everybody knows where they are and, you know, there are, it is
But
well.
Rand, for us, I'm sorry, I
That doesn't,
find that to be Bolshoi, and I don't mean the ballet when you say,
right,
I don't know where the voting polls.
Well,
There's
this-
three places. There's been three places forever.
right.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about Milford in
Oh,
this.
okay.
I'm not talking about Milford. I'm actually referring to places like Georgia and Florida where where elections are a predictable train wreck every year
That's
with
right.
people waiting in hours in line for
And we're
to
not allowed
vote
to give water or support
because
them.
there are inadequate polling stations and all kinds of pettifogging rules about which one you have to go to and stuff. All problems that could be easily solved if there were the political will to solve them, but in fact there is the political will to keep it that way.
Or to make it worse.
And-
You know, there have been lots of voter suppression laws passed. The consolidation of polling places and black communities, all the drop boxes for ballots being consolidated into businesses that are only open 9 to 5, so people who work full time or work
Can't
hourly
use them.
wages and multiple jobs can't get to their drop box to drop off their ballot. So there's all kinds of monkey business going on there. And, you know, I'd like to see some laws passed that would outlaw that. There was a law that the Democrats had proposed, I believe it was H.R. 1, that would have solved a lot of these problems. It would have made sure that all the maps, the election maps, would be done by voting commissions, nonpartisan voting commissions, you know, to get rid of gerrymandering.
We talk about gerrymandering, and yet the blue states set it up. I mean, look at Milford. We were part of a banana that reached out. Richie Neal used to have Milford on one end and
remember.
Springfield on the other because you had to blend
Right.
out the 12 Republicans had to get spread out.
And you know what? That's wrong. We shouldn't be doing that here either.
Right, nowhere.
But we're kind of in a situation where, you know, if we were to fix that in Massachusetts without insisting that it be fixed in like
Texas or
Texas
Georgia
or one of these
whatever.
other places,
Yeah.
that would be unilateral disarmament on our part. And so at some point, we're going to have the political equivalent of an arms control agreement between the parties that we're going to have an understood set of rules.
But isn't that what the Supreme Court should be weighing in on
Didn't
to
they
say?
Yeah,
just
but-
weigh in on Louisiana? No.
Well,
was
they
it-
just weighed in on, it's an Alabama, no, it's North Carolina. It's
North
North Carolina, and what they said was that the state Supreme Court has the power to review the state legislature's laws with respect to gerrymandering
And basing
voting
voting
laws.
districts on
So-
race was not acceptable.
And that the state Supreme Court had already said that wasn't acceptable.
And
And
it went to the Supreme Court.
yeah,
And
so
they just ruled on that.
so
And what
you know,
what the state legislature was hoping is that they could overrule the Supreme Court.
That's right.
And do whatever they want as far as drawing maps, whether it's racist maps or not.
And the Supreme Court overruled that, so.
Which
yeah,
honestly, I'm kind of surprised.
I am
to
too.
be
but,
honest.
I mean,
that
I'm
they've ruled
grateful
on
that
but,
they did that.
But What I'm worried about is that they're just throwing this decision out there,
Giving us a bone.
throwing us a bone, and then they're going to hit us with something else, like, oh, you
they
can't,
could see,
you
we're
can't strike
fair, we're
anymore,
fair.
union, sorry, you know?
Yeah, but take the bone.
Yeah.
It's progress. You know, part of me,
At the expense of something else is what we're worried about, though.
well,
Yeah.
but that's it.
So
When
you
it
take the
comes-
bone and you go back and try to get as much more as you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you're up against a fundamentally corrupt attitude that you can centralize power in state legislatures that can be whose makeup can be rigged by rigging the voting maps, and that's the way you get an 11-3 division in North Carolina when the state is like 52-48, and stuff like that in Wisconsin and other states where the Republican Party has found that by being ruthless enough with the gerrymandering, they can assure themselves of a permanent majority, and then they can just do what they want. And so now, obviously, once you have that in place, then you want to centralize as much power as possible in the legislature, which you now have control over. And the more this goes on, the less America resembles a democracy, and the more it resembles, I don't know, Hungary or someplace.
But even in Massachusetts, I mean, now we have Becky Roush as our rep.
Mhm.
But we had, as our senator, I'm sorry, she's no longer the rep, Ryan Fatman.
Mm-hmm.
Republican as Republican can be.
Yeah.
And he got voted in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's
So-
my state senator, more's the pity, but
I'm sorry.
yeah.
We're glad to have the yoke off our
I
necks.
know.
There was a
There
time
were,
when
there were enough voters who believed in him that
Well,
he got
again,
elected.
the low voting turnout, too, doesn't help. And he had
Mm-hmm.
a lot of money. He has name recognition. There were a lot of things in his favor which keep him in power. And
Because it was amazing that he could take the seat away from Dick Moore.
Mhm.
Well, when you go out and campaign, when you're supposed to be in the House voting and doing your job, and you beat the
He
path,
campaigned
and he can
hard
be very
because-
charming and talks the talk, but he doesn't follow through. If people knew him when he was state rep, the complaint was that he was never available, never around. He was great at campaigning, great at knocking on doors, but then kind of disappeared or was unavailable after that.
Yeah.
And he was the same as a senator, too.
But
he actually came to our house
Uh-huh.
to-
Campaigning. Right.
door to door to talk to our kids who weren't there at the time, but he actually did that. And, that's, I got to hand it to him. That's what you do.
outworked
That's
Dick
what you
Moore.
have to do.
Well,
yeah.
he did, and Dick
Uh,
Moore took a lot
was,
for granted.
Dick Moore
Well,
he got
I
complacent.
think
Yep.
He
Dick's
also may have been
energy
ready
level-
for retirement anyway.
Well, but I think his energy level wasn't the same as everybody says to win an election in Milford in the area, you got to go knock on everybody's door. I think Fat Man knocked on the door 3 times.
Right.
And
And he
yeah.
wears those shoes just to demonstrate. You ever notice that? He's got these old pair of shoes he wears all the time.
I never looked at his
Oh
show.
my God, look at his shoes.
his door knocking shoes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's almost like the equivalent of maybe a cross on his shoulder. I don't know. But there's,
But he was
worn,
always here
beat-up
when we
shoes.
needed him.
For what? A
For
photo
a-
op?
I wouldn't say a photo op. He brought money in. I mean, Becca's
He
bringing
rode on the
money in.
coattails of a lot of the people that did the work for him. I'm sorry. I'm very blunt, but I have.
Having
I
run
don't-
against him at one
I
point.
ran against him. I don't have much respect for someone who doesn't do a lot of work, who's not, engaged with the people you're representing. And many of his votes, most of his votes have been not for the people that he represents. It's been for the businesses and the 1% and people that have given him money. And those are his constituents. We were not his constituents.
Basically, he was a reliable no for anything.
Yeah,
There was no discussion.
no.
There was no, well, gee, I think this is a good idea, but I don't really like the funding or something. It was just no.
Although,
went up
interestingly
to his
enough-
office a number of times over the years, and if you're in the senator's office, you would think he would give you some eye contact when you're standing there, and he's with just an acknowledgement I didn't even get so much as an eye contact, acknowledgement I'm
See,
standing
that's
in the
totally
office for
different
something.
from my experience with him.
Did you contribute to his campaign? I'm sure that helps.
Yes.
Case-
Transparency,
I
yes.
rest my case.
Well, so we did, interestingly enough, have a little bit of success early on in our involvement in the climate campaign, Carolyn and I, getting him to oppose the funding mechanism for the Access Northeast pipeline,
Okay.
which was slated to come through the area, and which would have been paid for by a raise in the electricity rates of
Right.
all electricity consumers. So think about this: electricity consumers would had to have paid extra so that a gas pipeline could be brought through, even if you did not use gas.
That's right.
And
remember that.
so this eventually was ruled illegal by the Supreme Judicial Court, and that project collapsed because its funding mechanism collapsed. But we were able to talk to Fatman with the idea that this was effectively a tax, and if you can get him to oppose something if you can get him to see it as a tax, because all taxes are bad in his view.
In his view, right.
All taxes are bad, in many people's view.
Yeah. Well,
You just limit the depth of the taxes.
and so,
I mean, every year Milford puts money back to the tax rate to try and
keep the taxes from
going crazy.
escalating out of control.
So in general, I mean, I'm saying all taxes are bad. There has to be a certain level. Because otherwise, how do you fund society?
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Civilization costs money, but most of us think it's worth it. And but that's not the outlook of somebody like Ryan Fatman.
So you have to spin it in order to kind
Exactly.
of hit his sweet spot.
Push his buttons, yeah.
Right. Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, Becca's doing well for us. Fat Man did well for us. Dick Moore did well for us.
I think you're speaking really very kindly. You're very generous.
But we knew that about you already.
I'm not getting on that train, but that's okay. You go for it. You go
keep
for
bringing
it.
money to Milford, and I like them.
Yeah, because all kinds of good things you could do with that.
You know, I mean, that extra Chapter 70 money of $7 million
Got a school to pay for, yeah.
saved us.
Saved your bacon.
You know, Brian Murray is continuing that tradition, bringing home the bacon.
Mhm.
And if you don't, then the money's still going to be spent.
Yeah,
I'm a bit of a cynic to believe that it wouldn't get spent.
yeah. He's a
It
good
would just
guy.
be spent somewhere else.
We're happy to be represented by him.
And I don't, speaking of money spending too, it drives me crazy. I'm sure there's a method to the madness, but when you're spending the money, you get your budget, your line item, and toward the end of the year, boy, people go to crazy spending the rest of that money rather than give it back. How come? It almost feels like a waste. Because I
Well-
remember when I worked for the state, we get tight about how you're
Because
spending
of
money.
spend it or lose it
Right.
attitudes. In Milford,
And that's,
we're blessed. Our department heads, the reason we have 3% on average every year, I mean, this would be like 16 years of surplus for Milford this year. And it usually runs between $3 and $5 million surplus every year. The reason is we don't penalize you for good management.
Mm.
If you turn back $200,000 from your department, we don't start your budget next year
right, with less.
With 200,000 less.
200,000 negative.
So then my question is why is that done in government budget though? It just doesn't make sense. You're forced to waste money, it feels like.
Yes.
At the
Yes.
end of the fiscal year.
That's one of the biggest problems when you have this use it or lose it mentality, is not only do I not get to spend it this year, but next year they start.
So,
Right,
but this use it or lose it mentality must have its origin in actual fact.
Yes.
That
Right.
is what happens to you if you don't.
It's
So-
called zero-based budgeting, but it's never done correctly. The idea is, I don't care that you spent $100 last year. Tell me what you need for this
Mhm.
year.
right.
Yeah.
And if you only need 99, then you get 99.
You
If
need
you need
103?
101, you get that. But it doesn't work that way. because everybody's fighting for their
Right.
Piece of
piece.
the pie.
So zero-based is therefore a slogan that does not
Yes.
reflect what is actually being done.
Exactly.
Nice packaging, but no substance.
Right.
And like I say, we've been blessed because our department heads in Milford work with us. And every year we have to look and figure out, okay, what can we do? And if you think about it, we don't use profanity in Milford. Words like 2.5 override, debt
Oh.
exclusion, are about as profane as I can think. I'm not saying we can do it forever because we got a high school coming,
Right.
but we did Brookside.
Yeah.
We put money away in stabilization for the school and never touched it. We did Woodland, 28 million of our money, never touched it. The high school at 100 million, that may be
That's kind of a lot.
Yeah.
that may be out of our realm.
Maybe a couple of car washes.
Yeah. Wash your mouths out with soap for having used the word override.
Well, we're coming to the end. Next show, we want to talk about other areas and expand things like what's going on in Congress. Because in my mind, you talk about both sides are guilty of less than optimum conduct.
We never mentioned why CNN is talking about Trump, and the bottom line there is just that they're a business. And-
Well,
and-
it gets,
and they
them,
need-
it
and
gets
they get
people,
outrage clicks.
right.
Right.
That's
And-
really what it's
And they
about.
have a 24-hour news cycle to fill with not nearly 24 hours worth of news. Same with Fox, same with MSNBC. It's all very
And
repetitive.
like I say, both of them, I can't trust to only watch CNN or to only watch Fox. Because I'm not feeling like I'm getting unbiased information from either one. Sometimes when I get tired, I go to BBC.
Yeah.
It seems
yeah.
like I get clearer vision from
Or at least another
foreigners.
perspective, anyway.
Yeah, I have my own news sources that aren't corporate media, so.
Yeah, as do I.
Yeah. I
But, you
try,
know,
to,
just-
I try to get from a lot of different sources.
A
It's
lot
not
of
just
it,
one.
I just sit there and say, why do we keep some of these things alive?
A
Well,
lot of it's
it
fluff,
is.
too.
I mean, the early primary campaign is underway in the Republican Party, and it sure does look as right now as though Trump is way ahead, and so that is probably the justification they would offer you if you were to could get them to offer you one for why they're continuing to cover Trump, and it's sort of like everybody's hoping the prosecutors will save us from this troublesome man.
Even a lot of Republicans who
Yeah.
know that he's the weakest candidate and probably will not be able to win. And there's all kinds of havoc he can unleash when he does lose.
Well, I think a lot of it too is compared to what we're facing now, and I know you disagree, but I'll take lower inflation. And just 4 years I got spoiled with low inflation, low gas prices.
And you think that had anything to do with what he did?
Right, thank you.
He didn't not do something because while he was there, it stayed.
So you're willing
Well,
to
it-
allow someone like Trump to get in that's a misogynist, that it's insulting people, and at the sacrifice for your own personal benefit.
And a
I have a
security
hard time.
risk, a national security risk.
National, the
Well,
bullshit,
we'll take-
blowing up our democracy.
We'll take that up at the next show.
We sure will.
Because we're out of time here, and we'll start
Okay.
with that.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, let's start with that.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, thanks for joining. Thanks for listening to us. May God bless. May tomorrow be a better day than tonight. Good night, all.